October 1980. The American automotive landscape was a battlefield. The oil crises of the 70s had left the big three reeling, and the import invasion from Japan was no longer a threat. It was a conquest. Ford needed a hero. Not a fire-breathing Mustang or a chrome-laden LTD, but something radical. Something universal. They called it the World Car. A machine designed to conquer the Autobahn and the interstate alike. It was the Ford Escort. For nearly 2 decades, this little car didn't just compete. It dominated. It became the best-selling car in America, the backbone of suburban driveways, and the first taste of freedom for a generation of drivers. But was it truly a world car, or was the American version a different beast entirely? Today, we're diving deep into the history of the Ford Escort, the car that took over America in the 1980s. To understand the Escort, you have to understand the failure it replaced, the Ford Pinto. By 1980, the Pinto's reputation was, shall we say, a bit explosive. Ford needed a clean slate. The plan was ambitious. Project Erika. Ford of Europe and Ford North America would hold hands and build one single architecture to replace the European Mk2 Escort and the American Pinto. It was a beautiful dream of global synergy. Ford had already experimented with bringing European models like the Capri and the Mk-I Fiesta to the States, but those were niche products. The Escort was meant to be the main event. But as is often the case with long-distance relationships, the two sides started to drift. The American team wanted more chrome, more width, and softer rides to handle the vast American highway system. The Europeans wanted nimble handling and ultra-compact efficiency for tight city streets. By the time the 1981 Escort hit the showroom floor, the world car was more of a cousin's car. Despite sharing a basic shape and a common 94.2-inch wheelbase, they didn't share a single interchangeable body part. The only real bridge across the Atlantic? The CVH inline-4 engine and the ATX automatic transmission. The American version ended up longer and wider, sporting a heavier, more ungainly look than its sleek European sister. To celebrate this global-ish birth, the 1981 models featured a unique fender badge, a globe representing the Earth. It was a badge of honor for a car meant to unite the world. On October 3, 1980, the Escort officially launched. It was 6 inches longer and 3 inches taller than the Pinto. It felt like a real car. You could get it as a 3-door hatchback or a 5-door station wagon. And if you were feeling fancy, the Squire package gave your wagon that iconic 80s imitation wood grain look. By 1982, the Escort did the unthinkable. With a starting price of just $5,518, it became the best-selling car in the United States. It was the right car at the right time. The country was moving away from the gas-guzzling land yachts of the 70s, and the Escort offered a compromise: small car economy with big car Ford branding. But the early 80s were a time of rapid evolution. In 82, we saw the birth of the blue oval badge on the grille, replacing the blocky Ford lettering. We also saw the SS package, which stood for Super Sport, but that didn't last long. General Motors had a little something to say about the SS name, so for 1983, Ford rebranded their performance trim to a name that would become legendary: the Escort GT. As we hit the mid-80s, the Escort got its first major glow-up. The 1985 1/2 model brought a more aerodynamic front end with flush-mounted headlamps. The old 1.6-liter engine was bored out to a more respectable 1.9 liters. This wasn't just about looks, it was about survival. The competition from the Honda Civic and Toyota Corolla was getting fierce. This era also gave us the Pony. No, it wasn't a baby Mustang. It was the ultimate stripper model. It had vinyl seats, plastic trim, and a 4-speed manual. You couldn't even get factory air conditioning. But it was light, it was cheap, and it was efficient. Given their lighter weight, the Pony models actually had better fuel economy than their regular Escorts, making them a hit with budget-conscious commuters. By 1988, the 88.5 facelift arrived. Gone were the metal bumpers, replaced by integrated plastic units that gave the car a smoothed-out, modern look. The rear side windows were enlarged, and the whole rear end became more rounded. The Escort was aging, but it was aging gracefully, remaining a staple of American roads until the very end of the decade. Let's talk about the mechanical soul of the machine. The compound valve hemispherical, or CVH, engine was the heart of the Escort. It was developed specifically for this project on both sides of the Atlantic. It started with a humble 65 horsepower in 1981. By 1982, it was tuned to 69 horsepower. But for the enthusiasts, there was the Escort GT. In March 1982, an HO, or high-output version of the engine was added, pushing 80 horsepower thanks to a higher compression ratio and a new exhaust system. Multi-port fuel injection soon bumped that to 88 horsepower for 1983. But the real unicorn of the first generation? The Turbo GT. For a brief window in 1984 and 85, you could get a turbocharged 1.6-liter pushing 120 horsepower. It was a wild, laggy, 80s experience that transformed the sensible Escort into a legitimate pocket rocket. Only about 1,000 were built in 84. If you see one today, you're looking at a piece of extinct performance history. And we can't forget the diesel experiment. In 1984, Ford offered a 2.0-liter Mazda-sourced diesel. It produced a whopping 52 horsepower. Unsurprisingly, American buyers, who were already falling out of love with diesel after the disastrous GM diesel engines of the late 70s, largely ignored it. Less than 1.2% of Escorts ever left the lot with a diesel badge. By 1987, the diesel was dead, but it showed how hard Ford was trying to cover every possible base. Every Ford needs a Lincoln Mercury twin. Enter the Mercury Lynx. It was the Escort, but with more chrome, cascading grills, and parking lights that felt just a little bit more uptown. A late addition for 1983 was the Lynx LTS, the luxury touring sedan. It was the 5-door counterpart to the sporty Lynx RS, equipped with the HO engine, blacked-out trim, and TRX aluminum wheels. It was an early attempt at a European-style sports sedan for the American market. However, the Lynx was retired after 1987, replaced by the Mazda-derived Mercury Tracer, which signaled the beginning of the end for the pure American/European hybrid Escort. Then there was the Ford EXP, a two-seat sport coupe based on the Escort frame. It was the first two-seater Ford since the original Thunderbird. It looked funky, with its recessed headlights and bubble-back hatch. It wasn't a speed demon, but it was a bold attempt to make the world car platform exciting. Eventually, it was renamed the Escort EXP and given the standard Escort face before being phased out in 1988 to make room for the Ford Probe. In April 1990, the world changed. To stay competitive and lower development costs, Ford turned to its partner, Mazda. The second-generation Escort moved onto the Mazda-B platform, the same bones found under the Mazda 323 and Protégé. This was a massive shift. The Escort largely shed its European commonality and became an Asian-American hybrid. This wasn't just a rebadge, it was a revolution in drivability. The car gained independent rear suspension and a much more refined feel. The wheelbase grew to 98.4 inches, making it nearly as long as the Ford Tempo. It was a compact car now, moving up from its subcompact roots. The 1991 Escort GT was a revelation. Gone was the old CVH engine, replaced by Mazda's 1.8-liter DOHC BP engine. 127 horsepower. Four-wheel disc brakes. A high-revving personality. It was a car that could finally hold its head high against the Honda Civic C. For the families, we finally got a proper four-door sedan in 1992. And if you wanted the GT's power in a professional package, you hunted down the rare LXC. It was the four-door Escort GT, featuring all the performance bits, the 1.8L engine, the larger anti-roll bars, the dual-outlet exhaust, but in a sleeper sedan body. It remains one of the greatest hidden gems of the 90s. In 1997, the Escort entered its twilight years. While it still used the Mazda design chassis, the body was completely redesigned. The styling shifted to mirror the new edge and ovoid design language of the era. Think Mini Taurus. It was curvy, soft, and focused on comfort. Ford simplified the lineup, ditching the 3-door and 5-door hatchbacks. If you wanted an Escort, you got a sedan or a station wagon. The dashboard was updated to the integrated control panel look, with the radio and climate controls living in one big oval pod. It was the peak of 90s Ford design. But the writing was on the wall. Ford was working on a true world car, one that would finally live up to the original dream of Project Erika, the Focus. As the Focus arrived in 2000, the Escort was slowly relegated to fleet duty. The sedan was marketed primarily to rental car companies and government agencies for its final 2 years. To keep the youth interested, Ford introduced the Escort ZX2 in 1998. It was a stylish 2-door coupe with a 2.0-liter Z-Tech engine. It was surprisingly quick and stayed in production even after the sedan was killed off. But in June 2003, the final ZX2 rolled off the assembly line at the Hermosillo plant in Mexico. A 22-year legacy had come to an end. So, what is the Ford Escort's place in history? To some, it was just a disposable car, a cheap way to get from point A to point B. But the data tells a different story. Over 3 generations and millions of units sold, it kept Ford competitive during one of the most volatile eras in automotive history. It was a car of firsts. The first front-wheel drive Ford in North America. The first attempt at a truly global platform. It proved that America could build a small car that people actually wanted to buy, rather than just something they were forced to buy by high gas prices. The Escort was the bridge. It bridged the gap between the boxy, chrome-heavy cars of the 70s and the sophisticated, global machines of the 21st century. It was produced in Michigan, New Jersey, California, Ontario, and Mexico. It was truly a car of the Americas. Today, seeing a clean first-gen GT or an LXC sleeper is a rare treat. It reminds us of a time when the world was shrinking and Ford was trying to build a bridge across the ocean, one hatchback at a time. The Escort might not have the muscle of a Mustang or the ruggedness of an F-150, but for millions of people, it was the car that moved their lives. And in the world of classic cars, that makes it a legend. To truly appreciate the Escort, we have to look past the body panels and get our hands greasy. You see, the Project Erika era wasn't just about making a car that looked different. It was about reinventing how Ford built cars. Before the Escort, American Fords were largely body-on-frame or simple unibody designs with rear-wheel drive. The Escort changed the game. It featured a fully independent suspension, a rarity for economy cars at the time. Using a McPherson strut setup in the front and a unique, twin-stiff rear suspension, Ford was trying to give the American driver a taste of European handling. But there was a catch. Because American roads were wider and often rougher, the U.S. team insisted on softer spring rates. This led to that classic 80s Ford feel, smooth over the bumps, but a bit floaty when you pushed it into a corner. Meanwhile, across the pond, the European Mk3 Escort was being praised for its sharp, hot hatch reflexes. It was the same DNA, but with 2 very different personalities. The CVH engine, which stands for Compound Valve Hemispherical, was the star of the show. It was designed to be easy to maintain but efficient. Ford's engineers used a Hemi-head design because it allowed for better airflow and more efficient combustion. In 1981, this was high-tech stuff for a commuter car. But it wasn't perfect. Early CVH engines were known for being a bit thrummy and loud at high RPMs. To fix this, Ford spent the better part of the 80s refining the engine mounts and adding sound insulation. By the time the 1.9-liter arrived in 1985 one-half, the Escort had transformed from a buzzy economy box into a refined highway cruiser. Why did the world car dream struggle? It's a fascinating case study in corporate culture. The North American designers at Dearborn and the European designers at Dunton simply couldn't agree on what small meant. In Europe, the Escort had to fit into tiny medieval streets and navigate high-speed motorways. It needed to be a 3-door hatchback, a 2-door van, and even a 2-door convertible. In America, the Escort needed to survive 100-degree summers in Arizona and 20-below winters in Minnesota. Image: side-by-side comparison of the 1981 American Escort and the European Orion sedan. This divergence is most obvious when you look at the trunk. In Europe, they launched a separate model called the Orion for people who wanted a traditional trunk. In North America, Ford didn't bother with a sedan for the first 10 years of production, betting everything on the hatchback and the wagon. It wasn't until the Mazda-based second generation that the American Escort finally got the boot it needed to truly conquer the suburbs. Let's talk about 1988. This was a pivotal year for Ford. The Taurus had been out for a few years and was a massive hit, proving that aero was the future. The Escort was feeling like a relic of the early 80s, boxy and upright. The 88.5 revision was more than just a facelift. It was a desperate move to keep the Escort relevant while the next generation was being delayed. Ford's designers took the aero lessons from the Taurus and softened every edge of the Escort. They integrated the bumpers, giving the car a bottom breather look that improved aerodynamics and fuel economy. Inside, the changes were just as drastic. To meet new federal safety regulations, Ford added those iconic and sometimes annoying automatic motorized shoulder belts. You get in, close the door, and the belt would whir along the track to secure you. It was high-tech safety for the masses, and it became a defining feature of the late 80s Escort experience. By 1990, Ford owned 25% of Mazda. They realized that instead of fighting with their European division, they could leverage Mazda's expertise in small car engineering. This led to the CT120 platform. When the 1991 Escort debuted, it was a shock to the system. It felt solid. The doors closed with a thud instead of a clink. The dashboard didn't rattle. This was because it was essentially a Mazda 323 under the skin. But Ford didn't just slap a badge on a Japanese car. They styled the Escort to look like a baby Taurus. They gave the wagon vertical tail lamps that mimicked the expensive Mercury Sable. They were selling the American dream with Japanese reliability. And it worked. The second-gen Escort sold nearly 1.7 million units. It was a masterclass in how to do a joint venture correctly. As we moved into the late 90s, hatchbacks were becoming a dirty word in America. Everyone wanted SUVs or sporty coupes. Ford's answer was the ZX2. Launched in 1998, the ZX2 was intended to be a separate entity from the boring Escort sedan. It had its own unique sheet metal. None of the body panels were shared with the sedan. Under the hood, it carried the 2.0-liter Z-Tech engine, which was a world-class motor. With 130 horsepower and a lightweight chassis, the ZX2 was actually a blast to drive. It became a favorite for the tuner crowd of the early 2000s. With a few bolt-on parts, a ZX2 could surprise a lot of more expensive cars at a stoplight. It was the final flame of the Escort's performance legacy before the Focus ST and RS took over the mantle. For 22 years, the Ford Escort was the silent partner in millions of American lives. It was the car you learned to drive in. It was the car that got you to your first job. It was the car that sat in the background of every family photo from 1981 to 2003. It wasn't always the world car Ford promised in the brochures. It was often a compromise between two continents, or a blend of American styling and Japanese engineering. But in that compromise, Ford found a winning formula. They built a car that was just enough for everyone. The Escort reminds us that a car doesn't have to be a supercar to be important. It just has to be there when you turn the key. And for 2 decades, the Escort was always there. This deep dive covered the engineering, the corporate drama, and the evolution of the Escort. Would you like me to now generate a detailed technical specification table comparing the 3 generations, or perhaps a buying guide for anyone looking to find a survivor Escort today?